Everybody. This is our second JLF Colorado virtual author event, and we're just beyond delighted to be able to do this and offer it to everyone in the community and keep everybody uplifted and engaged in arts and culture at this time. Our session last week was well attended and just spectacular, and I know tonight will be spectacular as well. And we're so fortunate with who we're able to connect with in our author community. For many of you already know that the Jaipur Literature Festival is a cultural phenomenon that began in Jaipur, India 13 years ago and swiftly became the largest literature festival in the world, having inspired now over 200 literary festivals across Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and North America. JLF is far more than a celebration of literature, which indeed it is. JLF is committed to diversity and to creating safe platforms for conversations among brilliant thinkers and writers from diverse cultures and divergent perspectives. Additionally, JLF provides free literary workshops year-round in underserved and at-risk communities. The JLF Festival is not so much about books as it is about the ideas in the books, or the plays, or poems. Articulated in beautiful and profound manner, JLF is committed to a celebration of diversity and humanity, of each other's stories, and of peace. JLF Colorado managed to bring the festival to the US in 2015 as the first extension, along with London, outside of Jaipur, India. We are honored to have been selected as the North American home base for this astonishingly joyful and deep celebration of the best of humanity. And we are truly thrilled to present some of this to you this evening. So I'd like to introduce our panel. Marcia Douglas is a truly enchanting author of The Marvelous Equations of the Dread, a novel in bass rhythm. Notes from a writer's book of cures and spells, and Madame Fate, as well as a poetry collection, Electricity Comes to Cocoa Bottom. Did I get that right, Marcia? Her many awards include a Creative Capital Award, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, and The Marvelous Equations of the Dread was longlisted for the 2016 Republic of Consciousness Prize and the Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature. Marcia is a professor of creative writing to lucky students at CU Boulder. Stephen Dunn is the author of the powerful novels Potted Meat and Water and Power. He was born and raised in West Virginia, and after 10 years in the Navy, he earned a BA in creative writing from the University of Denver. His work can be found in Columbia Journal, Granta Magazine, and Best Small Fictions 2018. Stephen is also a professor at Regis University and has been a guest professor and speaker at many universities across the US. And he doesn't know I'm about to say this, but he is one of the most seriously intelligent and at the same time hilarious people I've ever known. Sarah Elizabeth Schantz lives on the outskirts of Boulder, Colorado with her family in an old farmhouse where they're surrounded by open sky, coyote, and century-old cottonwoods. Her first novel, Fig, debuted from Simon & Schuster in 2015 and was selected by NPR as a Best Read of the Year before winning the 2016 Colorado Book Award. She's currently working on her second novel, Roadside Altars, and recently won first place for short fiction in the Adirondack Review. She's a beloved professor of creative writing at Front Range Community College, where she's won several awards as Professor of the Year, campus and statewide. And Sarah is a magical being. Helen Thorpe is an illustrious Colorado author celebrated throughout the United States, a lifelong journalist and the author of 3 books, Just Like Us, Soldier Girls, and The Newcomers. Soldier Girls was named the best nonfiction book of 2014 by Time Magazine. Helen was formerly a staff writer with the New York Observer, the Talk of the Town section at the New Yorker, and Texas Monthly. She's written stories for many other publications, including the New York Times Magazine, Westward, Slate, and 5280. She has served as a visiting professor in the journalism program at Colorado College and will be a Ferris Professor of Journalism at Princeton University in the fall of 2020. The Newcomers was one of the most powerful books, nonfiction, reading like a novel, I have read about refugees in the United States. And with this, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator, who also was a panel participant, Marcia Douglas. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessie, and thank you for hosting this event. And hello to my fellow panelists, and hello to everybody out there in Zoom land. I can't see you, and it feels a little bit strange, I have to say, you know, but I know you're there, and I can feel the vibe. So thank you for coming, for attending. I know that even given the times that we're in, there are other things that you can be doing with your Tuesday night. So I appreciate you being here to listen to us reflect and mull over resilience. So I've been thinking a lot about resilience and what it means, you know, what it means to me personally. When I think of resilience, I think of, you know, this type of stretchy cloth that you can, that has a little bit of give, and then it pulls back. Or I think of those lizards whose tails you can cut off, and then they grow another one right back. I think that that's one way of thinking of it anyway. I'm the sort of person that I thrive on symbols. So the lizard with the cut off tail is the symbol for me. However, I also think that even if you do not grow back that tail and you find a way to navigate the world, that's being resilient too. So I think that there's a way in which resilience is all about moving forward and remaining hopeful. For me personally, I think that it's a skill which I have been trying to learn maybe all my life, you know, in various ways, as an immigrant, as a parent, as a woman of color, in the academy, as a writer too, in all of those ways. So I think the question that I would begin by maybe inviting my fellow panelists to address is to maybe hear you speak a little bit about how the notion of resilience has maybe shaped your life and writing. Maybe that's a good place to start as a way for us to know each other. And I don't know who wants to start. Are we all muted now? Maybe we should unmute. Anybody who wants to jump in.
I'm hearing that we have a lot of feedback. It seems like that's what the chat is saying at the moment. So I don't know. I have feedback right now. Do I?
No, you don't. I'm not sure where it's coming from. I've been trying to, everybody, according to my controls, are muted other than the speakers. So I don't know. I've been actually working on it.
Can you still hear it too? Can you still hear it?
Not right now.
I think it may be Marcia's mic may be too loud.
Oh.
So I think you may have to turn your mic down a little.
Okay. I wasn't sure if we were just having like a psychedelic experience or something.
No, yeah,
I know, right?
I thought it was something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We have a participant from Pune, India. Oh, nice. So, okay, I think we can go ahead. It seems better.
Were you able to hear my question, or do I need to repeat that?
Maybe repeat it, because it was a little intrusive. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So what, you know, I was talking about the fact that all my life I feel that resilience is a lesson that I have been attempting to learn in various ways. You know, as an immigrant, you know, as a teacher and so on, as a parent, as a writer. And I think that maybe a useful place for us to start this discussion would be for us to each maybe speak just a little bit about how the notion of resilience has informed our lives and our writing. Because I think that it plays out for each of us in a different sort of way. So, you know, there are various ways of handling this. You can just jump right in as you see fit, or we can sort of answer this in order.
Sarah, you were about to start?
I was only doing it mostly because of the feedback, but I can answer the question. I can start us off. I don't know, I've been thinking about the word resilience all day and all weekend, looked up the etymology, looked up the definition of the verb to resile. And it's a word that I'm honestly having just some issues with, I guess. Like one of the definitions talks about how it's about like rebounding or bouncing back to the original form after some sort of trauma or whatever has happened that pushes you down, right? And I don't know that we can ever go back to our original form. And I think that's something that I've been interested in as a writer for a long time, is what are those outside influences that are coming at me, especially when I'm working on a longer project like a novel. You know, for example, with my first novel, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, pancreatic cancer, while I was working the novel. And in many ways, while it's a complete work of fiction, it's still a book about a girl losing her mother. And I don't know that the book would have existed the way that it does now had she not died during the course of me working on that particular piece. And so I'm 2 years out now from having lost my daughter, my oldest daughter, and it's been a different experience. I've had a lot of trouble writing since then. It hasn't been an easy, it's been a different kind of loss, a different kind of death. I've written a lot of short stories from the point of view of middle-aged men who have lost their children, and for some reason I can sort of address my grief by thinking about maybe my animus or something. That's what my therapist says, at least, is that perhaps as I'm, you know, moving into middle age, that's my expression, is just, I don't know. So at any rate, I'm kind of interested in this idea of bouncing back to the original form, and I don't know that you can.
Yeah, I hear you. What you're saying reminds me of something that Michelle Obama says in her autobiography. She says that grief and resilience go hand in hand. And I'm listening to you, Sarah, and I'm wondering whether your writing is somehow a vehicle or a way in which you actually work through these issues. Is that true?
I think that it is. And I also think that there's maybe different periods of composting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I think that we live in such a capitalist driven society that there's this pressure to always get like product out there.
Yeah.
And right now, I think I'm just more interested in the listening process at the moment, and then just seeing what sort of happens later on the page.
Right. I hear you. What about Stephen and Helen? How has resilience shaped your life and writing? Is that something which is clear to you?
Yeah. Like Sarah, I had never looked up the word in my life, and I was just wondering, like, it's just a word that I've taken for granted or thought I knew what it was, but I'd never known the etymology of it either. So yeah, I did like Sarah and looked it up. But thinking about it also, it took on a different definition for me. I think when I was younger or just growing up as a dude, you know, you think being resilient is to be tough or only to be tough. I think that's the only definition of it. But kind of in my adult life, it has changed to I don't want to say the opposite of toughness, but it's changed to something else, like softness. So
Yeah.
for me, like resilience now is creating soft spots, like soft spots in life for people, for myself.
Yeah.
However that looks a lot of different ways also. And also creating like soft spots in my books too, like characters are tender to each other, and in my mind the books can be tender themselves to readers, like they have some spaces to be in this book, you know, some
Right.
soft spots to be in this book. So that's how resilience has like been changing over time for me. It's just about tenderness and making soft things, and just thinking about all the times where people have made soft spots for me and how much I've thrived because I've had room or something soft to support me. So just want
Right.
to do that also. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. You know, I think you're right. You know, resilience doesn't mean that there's no anxiety or stress. On the other hand, it simply means, in a way, that you find or create a space to navigate the anxiety, as you say, maybe via soft spots, as you put it. But it's I think that resilience is whatever means or tools that we can use to somehow create a map to move through the difficulty or the trauma. And I think that maybe that looks different for all of us in a certain way. So yeah, that does make sense.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, yeah, sorry, Helen.
Oh, I was going to say that for me, I feel that I have almost come to the subject of resilience, not knowing that that's where I was heading, not by accident, but my family immigrated to this country in the 1960s. My dad grew up in Dublin. My mom grew up on a dairy farm in rural Ireland. And as I was growing up, you know, I was the firstborn child. So I was born when they were in England, and then they came here, had more kids. And I was really interested in the situation of other families who were new to the United States, where students wound up in a parallel situation, but undocumented after their families brought them here. And then later in a different book, writing about refugee families. And I was really just interested in exploring, how does this country treat new people who come? How have people been treated differently than I have? Why? But along the way, as I've gotten to know particularly refugee families, the level of resilience that some of these families have, some of the experiences that they've been through, it's just so extraordinary. And in our news media, we tend to focus on problematizing. So we talk about the problems these families face, or, you know, the catastrophes in their home country. And then we forget to tell the rest of the story, which is the positive part of the story, after they get accepted for resettlement and find a new home and start, you know, have the tremendous energy to start over again. And as a result, and we forget about, we forget to celebrate the resilience that they're showing up here with and sharing with us all.
Right. Thank you for doing that work, Helen. You know, it's an experience that I can certainly connect with, having arrived in the US as a teenager and being undocumented for a very long time myself. I grew up in Jamaica and came here as a teenager. So I understand that journey and the sort of resourcefulness and resilience and innovation that it requires in order to get through all of that. So you know, I feel that we're all bonded together right now in this time with all of the crazy upheavals that we're going through, you know, strange times as they are. And I'm wondering, you know, and I feel that this is not a new question, but maybe it's a question which has more urgency at this time, and which we need to think about carefully. And that is, as writers and artists, what can we say now about why the work that we does matters and is important? That's a big question, perhaps, but how would you answer that?
I have a ready answer in my hip pocket because I was just asked to be a commencement speaker at my son's 4-person graduation ceremony in our street. A neighbor got live music. It was very sweet. And I tried to kind of address this, but the point I was trying to make to the kids was stories really matter. It matters what stories you tell yourself.
Yes.
It matters what stories you take in, especially right now. You have to know how much suffering it's important to understand and how much suffering you can't bear anymore if you need to sort of stop for a moment and not pay attention to the news for a little while to get yourself back together.
Yeah.
And I think, the stories that we choose to read when we go to sleep at night, or what we watch on television, all those stories we take in, it really affects us. It really matters.
Mm-hmm.
I think others can probably say more, but that's what I've been talking to my son about.
Yeah. Storytelling as medicine, as I've heard many people put it, story as a medicine. Yeah. I'm reminded too of what Audre Lorde spoke about when she said that poetry is not a luxury. And I think that us fiction writers have another version of that too. Our storytelling, our narratives are certainly, it's not a luxury. It's something which is filled with urgency, I'm also thinking of someone such as Barbara Christian, the African-American scholar and literary theorist, who said that writing, she wrote because literally she knew that it could save her life. Very strong statement, but I feel that, in the times in which we live, that we can experience the work that we do as artists in that sort of way.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this even before the virus for a long time. After my first novel, I was invited to a conference in San Francisco, the American Libraries Association, and I was on a panel of debut writers, and one of the questions that they asked us was what we had done to treat ourselves with our advance money. And we were told specifically that we should talk about what we had bought as a luxury, like something, a treat. I did not have that kind of financial privilege to get myself anything. I got the computer that I'm on right now because the computer that I'd had before kept crashing. But one of the things that I kind of thought about the whole time I was at this particular conference was so many of the debut fiction writers specifically, they all came from extreme privilege. Like they were able to write and not have to work the hustle that I feel like many of us do, the constant, this job, that job, that job. Oh, I'll take that job. Let's do this job. Let me do this. And there's not a lot of room for writing. And so I think one of the things that I've been thinking about with resilience is that, yes, no matter what, I'm always going to write. My daughter's name is story. I believe in the power of metaphor. But I also believe that we need to find a way to support our artists and our writers. We can't just be expected to constantly bounce back up into any kind of body without being valued by the society that we live in.
True words.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I do think that our work as artists can be something of an antidote to trauma, you know, that it can certainly function that way. I feel that in general, when my writing life is going well, that I'm just more grounded in the world, and that I need to be creating. I would say even create anything, not just writing. I'm the sort of person that just likes to make, you know, and if I am making and creating, I feel more centered, and I feel that I'm a better Marcia. And if I'm not involved in any sort of project of that sort, then I struggle a bit in life. So it is, our writing is not a luxury. It is something which is very necessary for our survival. And as Barbara Christian said, in some cases, it can quite literally, you know, keep us alive, I feel. I really feel that very strongly. And yeah, so, you know, I've been thinking too about, you know, going back to this time of pandemic and thinking about what it means to be a writer, a creator, and also thinking about, you know, the aftermath of this situation and what will remain for us as artists in the world. You know, there's this Mary Oliver quote that I really love, and you know, it's from her poem. I think the name of the poem might be "The Uses of Sorrow" or something like that. And she says, "Someone I once loved gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift." Do you know that poem?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you probably heard it. It's often quoted.
I haven't thought about it in a long time, so thank you.
Yeah, you know, I've been thinking about these lines and wondering what is the gift that we can glean, that we can take from this situation. Do we know it yet? Can we anticipate it? I don't know. What do you think?
I think that for me, like as a writer and parent, sometimes it's like always engaging in uncertainty. So this situation feels different a little bit, but it also feels like another function of engaging in uncertainty. So it's like we still kind of create and live our lives in uncertainty. So it's just kind of dialed up a little bit now. So I'm not so concerned right now. Maybe I will be, but right now I'm just like doing the best I can in this uncertainty. And just having a lot of grace with myself. Like maybe I don't need to write for a couple months or something. I don't know. But yeah, just trying to have some grace and be okay with the uncertainty, which is not easy sometimes. It takes work, especially if you're a writer dealing with uncertainty. Like it takes work to do that also.
Right. Having the courage to not be so hard on yourself.
Yeah.
Is that what I hear you saying? Yeah. I think too that one thing that I am beginning to learn is that, well, you know, it's obvious it's a virus and we're all connected, we're physically connected, but I think that we can push that further and we can think of the other ways in which we're connected as well, you know, also spiritually, mentally. I think that we're just all connected. I think I heard somebody say recently, and I think that this language was useful for me, they explained it that humanity is just one ecosystem. And so I feel that we explore that ecosystem, these layers of connection via our writing and our stories that we tell as well. The stories that we tell, the words that we put out there are ways in which we can connect with each other. And we connect with each other by knowing and understanding each other and by rendering ourselves vulnerable, I would say. And the space of narrative and story is a space where you can be vulnerable and where you can reveal yourself and who you really are inside, you know, and make connection with others. I personally feel that there's a part of me that is, you know, maybe someone who knows me in an everyday way might not glimpse this other part of me that they would only see in my creative work, but which is me too, but might not be always obvious, might not be there on the surface, is what I mean. So the work that we do, I feel, is important in that way. I'm thinking, Ellen, about what you were saying about storytelling and how that functions. Yeah. So, you know, thinking about resilience and writing and artists, do you guys have some kind of go-to list, you know, of writers or things that you read to, you know, in times like these?
Yeah, I'm lucky and have a 4-year-old kid who is super hilarious and super imaginative. So yeah, I just go to my kid and hang out and tell stories and talk. It's so cool. I love it. And my daughter is 18, so I have an 18-year-old and a 4-year-old, and
wow.
And she's an artist too. So, you know, I talk about intellectual stuff with her, just fun stuff too. Then
Yeah.
I'm imagining myself as an 18-year-old with her. And then I'm also imagining myself as a younger parent because of my 4-year-old. So I'm in kind of like this weird like time loop or whatever. I don't know what it is, but it's just like a beautiful spot for me where I can imagine myself doing all these points of my life at the same time because of my children's age differences. And it's really, so I just go hang out with them and talk. Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Yeah, that's a blessing. You have a 4-year-old and an 18-year-old.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. My the way I summarized it, like a couple years ago, I had to do interviews with my daughter, practice interviews, and the son, he was like 2 at the time, wanted to be involved. So I had to have like sock puppets asking the interview questions. So this is like a good how to like resolve both of those things. So it's pretty nice.
Yeah. When my daughter was young, you know, one of the blessings of having a young child was reading children's stories. And you know, there are lots of really great children's books out there, which actually are all about you know, the gift of resilience too. You know, that's definitely a through thread in a lot of children's stories, and I still wistfully think of those days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. You know, one of my go-tos for times of trouble, I mentioned Audre Lorde earlier, and what she said about poetry is not being a luxury, but I also really love her book, Sister Outsider. It's
Yes.
Yeah, do you know that one? Yeah, a book of essays.
Yeah.
And she, you know, there's this quote that I remember I had handwritten, and I had it on my wall for the longest time. Back in the day when I was a graduate student, and I carried the same little paper with me from place to place. And the quote goes, when I dare to be powerful, to use, how does it go? When I dare to be powerful, to use my gifts in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. And you know, there's so much in her work that just buoys you up, you know, and you know, she gives you that map, so to speak, that we need in order to navigate our life and navigate our individual traumas and so on. My other go-to is music. music and literature are kin for me. And, you know, I always say that if you listen to some good reggae music, you might not even need a therapist. So that's one of my go-tos. So, I think that we all need some good writing and art, you know, whatever form that art might take in our toolbox in order to, you know, navigate us through these times. Yeah.
Adding on a little bit to what we're talking about, I find that, Stephen, you were speaking about the uncertainty and sort of engaging with that. When uncertainty rises to a certain level in my life, I find I need to read books that I've read before where I already know what the ending is.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually rereading most of my favorite novels, which are behind me. I read a lot of fiction, even though I'm in the nonfiction genre, but because that carries me away out of the present moment and into a different time. But I find rereading something where I already know the end so comforting if there's a great amount of uncertainty in my life.
Yeah, yeah. I can certainly relate to that too, rereading, you know. I have a few books which I'm rereading this summer, you know. And yeah, I love this notion of returning to a book as well. There's some books which become like Bibles for me, because I have to reread and sample, and they can sort of just carry you through life in that way.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful.
I've been reading a lot of magical realism. I feel like magical realism has always been such an expression of any kind of time of trouble or strife, right? And to be able to have that sort of magical element in an otherwise normal reality, there's just so much medicine in that. And then the other thing that I think I've had a few students who have had their books just come out, and they've had their, you know, their whole debut book tour canceled. And so I've been also really making an effort to try to read people who their books are coming out right now and they don't necessarily have the support that they normally would be able to have by going out into the world. And so that's something that I'm trying to do and trying to encourage others to do as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's important. Thank you.
I like that a lot. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, you know, when we speak about resilience, sometimes I worry that, you know, when we speak about resilience and we celebrate what it means to be resilient and we try to foster that, I wonder whether there's a way in which we might unwittingly distance some people who actually don't feel that they come to that easily. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah, I've been thinking about Roxane Gay's book Hunger a lot.
Yeah.
And she talks about sort of, you know, this idea that the word victim is a word that any victim should try to shed, right? That they need to become a survivor right away. And it talks about how problematic that experience is for her on the bad days where she just simply maybe isn't a survivor that particular morning. Maybe that particular morning she is still just a victim of rape and violence, right? And I think I worry a little bit that this like American dream concept of bounce right back up, keep picking yourself up again and again, it puts the responsibility on us instead of putting responsibility on stopping the oppressor from oppressing.
Right. Yeah. I think that's something important to think about, you know. And also sometimes one thing that was said to me is that sometimes someone might be, you know, they're always celebrated for being resilient and strong. And you maybe that's just their mask, and that's just their facade, but they don't feel that way inside. But they're always being told that they're resilient and strong, and that maybe it stops them from actually telling their truth. And that's something to think about, you know. So having said that, I guess my next question would be, what advice can we give to others who maybe are struggling and struggling to claim any form of resilience? What can we say to those people? Or for that matter, what can we say to ourselves?
I would say just think of all the possibilities of what resilience can mean, and maybe redefine the definition. If that person needs to feel some resilience, just similar to Sarah posted something on Facebook a while ago about redefining what success is. Also, that success doesn't look one way. So same with resilience, like it doesn't look one way, and it may look like something different for each person depending on where you are. It may change day to day or hour to hour, who knows, you know, but just I'm all about redefining stuff when you need to. So.
Yeah. I think that's excellent. And I think too that it's important for us to not beat ourselves up too much, you know, and that it's okay to feel sad, and that is a normal thing. I think that's important. You know, this isn't a magic wand, but bringing our conversation back to words and the power of words. One thing which has helped me and which I know has helped others is memorizing something beautiful. You know, memorizing an empowering, beautiful poem, you know, something where you just get lost in the language and it gives you goosebumps. You know, pick a beautiful, lovely piece of writing and just live with it. I would say, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Kim Rosen, where she wrote this book called Saved by a Poem. And she talks about how a poem can be a physical event. And she talks about how, a poem can be a transformative agent. I would say any beautiful piece of writing, really, you know, and how there's a difference between memorizing a poem and learning it by heart. So I think what I'm suggesting here is maybe to pick a beautiful piece of writing, something that moves you, and just learning it by heart, which means living with it for a really long time. I think that there's a magic and a medicine that can come out of that effort because there's power in words. So one thing that I'm hoping, did you each bring something to read, maybe just a little bit, a very short passage that you'd like to share? Maybe now is a good time to do that. Just something very short. And shall we begin with you, Stephen?
Oh, yes.
I'm looking at the screen, and you are to my left. Yes. Helen is to my right, and Sarah is in the lower left-hand corner.
So speaking of rereading, I brought something that's not my own. This is a book called The Flower Shop by Leonard Cohen. And it's about a flower shop in Vienna. I forget which Vienna. But anyway, so it's about like the operations of the flower shop and their design aesthetic. So it's kind of like a design book. But so I'm just going to read 2 short passages from that. The Flower Hospice. A flower during its stay at Blumenkraft, that's the name of the flower shop, is typically moved 2, 3, sometimes 4 times into different provisional arrangements. During this moving from vase to vase, or during processing, or during deliveries to outside clients, a stem may break, or a flower's quality may become somehow compromised. In such cases, The flower might be placed in the flower hospice. Hospice flowers are used as free giveaways to children and to friends of the staff, and for practice arrangements. Alexandra likes making bridesmaids bouquets for her hypothetical wedding and miniature flower bunches for Barbie dolls. Alexandra didn't want to see almost perfectly good flowers thrown away. She felt sorry for them, so she took them home. Then she started expanding the flower hospice. Christine began in the back of the shop and became its head nurse. From a strictly commercial point of view, perhaps it's a waste of time to fuss with flowers you can't or won't sell, says Alexandra. But since I'm not involved with the shop's management, I don't have to look at the big picture. If I did, I'd probably throw the flowers in the recycle bin. Fortunately, I'm only concerned with the small picture.
That's a different take on flowers. Who is the writer of that?
Leonard Corin. He was an artist and architect, and he has a book about like wabi sabi, and this one is about the flower shop. So a lot of books on design, aesthetics, and philosophy of art.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Helen and Sarah, did you bring something?
Yeah, I have something that I can read. This was a moment in the classroom at South High School where I was fortunate enough to be invited to spend a year in an English language acquisition classroom with 22 students from 11 countries who spoke 14 home languages. And this is a moment when the students decide to tell me a little bit more about their home languages. Mm-hmm. The word for book was virtually identical in the home languages of many of the students from the Middle East. In Arabic, it was kitab, in Tajik, kitab, in Turkish, it was kitab, Jacqueline pointed out. And in Farsi, Shani hastened to add, the word was kitab, just like in Arabic. Initially, I thought this kind of convergence existed only in the Middle East, but as I spent more time with students from Africa, I realized I was wrong. Dili told me that in Kunama, the word for book was kitaba, and Methuselah said in Swahili, it was kitabu. That was the moment when I finally grasped my own arrogance as an English speaker. I mean the arrogance harbored by someone who knew only European languages, which rendered the well-laced interconnectedness of the rest of the world invisible. I was starting to see it though, the centuries-old ties that bound Africa and the Middle East, born of hundreds of years of trade and travel and conquest and marriage. Kalb was the word that the students wanted to teach me about most. One day over lunch, Shani got very puppy-like about this concept bouncing around in her chair as we were sitting with Rahim, Jacqueline, and Mariam. Kalb, my language, Kalb, Arabic, Kalb, Farsi, she proclaimed. Okay, I thought, I get it. They found another cognate. But what was Kalb? Kalb means heart, Rahim explained in his more advanced English. This word, it is the same in all our languages. I left South thinking Kalb and heart were one and the same. I used one word to refer to a muscle in my body and the concept of falling in love and the idea of what it takes to raise a family or to teach an entire classroom full of teenagers from around the world. Kalb and heart seemed identical. Then I looked Kalb up on Google Translate one weekend while the kids were missing me and I was missing the kids. When I asked Google to change heart into Arabic, it gave Kalb as expected, but when I asked it to switch Kalb into English, I got heart, center, middle, transformation, conscience, core, marrow, pith, pulp, gist, essence, quintessence, topple, alter, flip, tip, overturn, reversal, overthrow, capsize, whimsical, capricious, convert, change, counterfeit. The word also meant substance, being, Pluck. I'm in love with this word, I thought. What is all this movement about? My own concept of heart didn't include the idea of flipping, capsizing, or reversing. There was something reified and stolid about my sense of heart, whereas the idea of heart that these kids possessed appeared to have a lighter, more nimble quality.
Thank you. You know, listening to you, I'm thinking about the way in which language is power. And I was also reminded too of what Frantz Fanon said about to speak another language is to enter another consciousness, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. I have something to share if you don't, Sarah. Were you about to share something?
I do have something, yeah, I was just waiting.
Okay. Okay.
This is from a short story that I've been working on this last week. And obviously the idea of death comes up a lot in my writing these days. Emma Jean's grandmother was a firm believer that everything happens in threes, and the third accident Emma Jean's mother got into was just after Emma Jean's sweet 16, the night before Thanksgiving that year. They'd all three gone to celebrate Emma Jean's mama as she received her one-year chip at an AA meeting in the basement of a Baptist church in Newport that smelled like ozone and black mold. But she'd gone home with her grandmother while her mother went to buy the turkey they were planning on deep frying that year, because Emma Jean's grandmother had learned how to do this from the same infomercial she'd ordered the deep fryer from. Emma Jean's mama was getting the turkey from a friend of a friend who had a farm 30 miles down I-40 in North Carolina. And even then, the freeway frightened Emma Jean as it speeds through the mountains going 75 miles per hour too fast on too much twisting blacktop. A game of trust she can't play because she's never trusted no one, not ever. Emma Jean's mother was on her way home when a truck driver coming up behind her fell asleep, swerved lanes, and took out Emma Jean's mama's Honda Civic. The Honda Civic smashed into a station wagon from Vermont, and the two cars landed in a tangle of twisted metal and shattered glass and body parts the roadside ditch took to cradling as the semi slid on its side until it finally stopped a quarter of a mile away. According to the autopsy report, her mother's elbows had both been shattered. She'd seen it coming, the medical examiner had explained. The exam also revealed a fibroid tumor in the woman's womb, the size of a fist, and a spatter of cysts on each ovary. For a former addict and alcoholic, she was otherwise remarkably healthy. The state trooper who came to their house to tell them the bad news had brought the turkey with him. He asked where to put it. Emma Jean's grandmother just took it from him like it was a small child and balanced it on her hip. As the trooper said she'd need to go and identify the body of her one and only daughter, Emma Jean's grandmother even jiggled the dead bird as if it threatened to make a fuss. Emma Jean counted 49 seconds inside her head with the state of Mississippi stitched between each number to guarantee the accuracy as she stood behind her matriarch. With a firm nod, her matriarch finally responded, said she understood. I know where to go, what to do, she said, and Emma Jean's skin goose-fleshed as every hair on her body took a stand like the bodies resurrected come Judgment Day. The trooper got back into his vehicle, then pulled out of the driveway backward, and once his taillights vanished around the bend, Emma Jean's grandmother stumbled into the yard from the stoop where she'd been standing. She set the turkey in the red wheelbarrow that seemed to be waiting there for just this purpose, and grabbed a shovel from under the trailer, and not far from the Roses Sharon dug a hole, roughly the circumference of 3 feet and just as deep. She buried the dead bird, then got into her Plymouth Voyager and left Emma Jean still standing just inside the door. A week later, Emma Jean helped her grandmother paint an old tractor tire they'd gotten from Rufus, the same pink as the trailer and the cinder blocks. They placed it atop the grave, filled it with good soil and miracle grow, and slowly sifted Imogene's mother's ashes into the dirt, mixing with their bare hands. Then they planted the seeds and starts they'd selected from the garden section of the store. Everyone had taken to calling Wally, like it was a friend and not another outsider foe coming to threaten their way of life.
Very strong prose. I love all the texture in your work. Is that from Fig?
No, it's from a short story that I'm working on right now.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to read something really little. In the spirit of resilience, this is about youth, because I feel that the youth of our communities can help move us forward, and I would like to think that they are the courageous ones, the brave ones, the new ones, and the ones to help us find the map and navigate. So this piece that I'm going to read envisions the youth coming forward in a time of trouble. But look here, an army of youth coming from the 4 directions and into the square. They come in hundreds, pour out from the seams of the island and down into Kingston, from Porus through Maypen, from Morant Bay through Bull Bay, from Onotta Bay down Junction, from Buff Bay through Newcastle, from Trenchtown and Rima and Waterhouse and Jonestown, with drum and guitar, bass and amp, bongo and trombone, DJ and war maracas. They move decided as creatures in migration, answering remembrance from the future. Their voices in full anticipation, they hum a bass so deep the island shudders, remembering word resting for 300 years on the tip of the tongue. Ash, ash, ashe, 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 ashe. Jaja youth, remember them I and I. They call Gully Water Passage, routes without precinct, bloodways, jaways, higher ground crossings, wake up teachment, risen dread mighty, soundbam nation, bonsai rising, the new word written on the inside of a shoe. Zion mine train, Zion mine train, Zion mine train. People get ready, Zion mine train, Zion mine train. Ashe, 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 ashe. Zion mine train, Zion mine train, Zion mine train. People get ready, Zion mine train, Zion mine train. Listen now, listen, they are calling your name. And ashe is a Yoruba word which means the power to make things happen. So I think that it's a word of resilience. I think now that we can open for Q&A. I believe we're having one, true?
Yes, we are, and Jules will manage the Q&A. Jules, if you could put your camera on, that would be good. There are some questions in the chat already. I'll put my camera on too. So mostly people can type their questions into the chat. You can also use your raise your hand link on your panelist panel, which is, to the right of your screen. I'm sure we all know how Zoom works these days. And Jules will call on people and read questions from the chat.
I agree with the chat that was beautiful and read like a song.
Yeah. And I have to say something just because especially in light of what Helen just read, as Jules well knows, ashe is also a word out of I don't know if it's a Tibetan word, but it's out of a Tibetan tradition of Shambhala and of Buddhism that really is the word for the essential life force to make of the universe. So talk about language. How that happens. It's just sort of, fascinating. I remember you reading this before, Marcia, and it also striking me like, wow, we have that word too.
Yeah, that word "ashe," just to shed a little more light on it after what Jesse was saying. It's, as you're reading that, Marcia, I was like utterly electrified because it's central to some practices we've received from one of our Tibetan teachers. It's actually not from Tibetan, it's from the land of Shangshung, which may several thousand years ago have been somewhere near Kashmir, which is connected to Persia, and who knows where all that goes. Anyway, interesting questions here, and it was beautiful to listen to all of you read. I should just get on with it, but just listening to all four of you read and talk has been just wonderful. Thank you, more than we could possibly say. All the panelists, Sabrina has a question for you. How do you get started with your writing? When you're sitting there staring at a blank page, or maybe you wake up with something like, that you've got to go write down, or however it is, what gets you going when you want to start writing something? One question here. And, well, there's more, but maybe just start with that one for a moment. If any of you would like to pick it up.
I can go ahead and start. I show up to the page whether or not I'm inspired to show up to the page, because this is who I am and what I do. And part of it is a discipline and a practice. I tell my students all the time that they need to write badly. The more that you write, the more of the right words come through. So I try to write every day, even if it's just for a few minutes, no matter what. And then I devote other parts of my day to writing. I'm writing when I'm in the bathtub. I'm writing back when I used to actually go anywhere and drive. In my head, I spend time with my characters. I devote everything to the page.
Lovely.
Well, I really appreciated, Stephen, what I agree with Sarah, and I've typically been a daily writer, but I also, Stephen, appreciated what you said about kind of giving oneself some permission in these times to absorb the times that we live in. And I've been struggling recently with writing, and I think giving oneself the permission to write badly is a pretty critical step in the process that I would echo and affirm. The self-critical part that we carry that notices that our writing is bad, that's our internal editor. And I've had a little bit of a breakthrough this week with something that I've been wrestling with for a long time, 15 years, a personal essay. And you never know when the breakthrough will come. And it's filled me with joy to have a little bit of progress this week. But I think keeping at something, knowing when to put it aside, stick it in a drawer for a year, take it back out again, is part of it too.
I write because it feels urgent to do so. I also love writing as well, even when it's not going well. There's something which, as I said earlier, grounds me in a certain way, even though I might be struggling with a piece of writing. And I think it was Sarah who said this earlier on. I write when I can and where I can. And I'd like to be able to say that I have, this wonderful regular practice where I get up at 5 in the morning every morning and write, but it's not really that way for me. I write, wherever I am, at a little table in the kitchen, or, on the bus when I used to ride the bus. Remember back in the old days? But yeah, so I write when I can, and somehow it gets done.
Yeah, I show up to the page with a lot of wonder and urgency also. I'm definitely not a person who writes every day, nor do I desire to write every day or feel the need to do that every day. Yeah, I just don't. And, I take an intentional like 2 to 3 months off per year, just so I can be and do all the things that I am. And it's easier for me to like bring all of those elements back to writing whenever I do it. But I'm also never like not thinking about writing or thinking about creating or making. So this for me is like taking like 2 to 3 months off to not be a writer. I super appreciate that time. My light is getting so weird.
There are all sorts of wonderful questions floating around in the chat and in the Q&A, and I'm just trying to sort through them. Drew Searchinger wonders if each of you might recommend a book or piece of writing that inspires resilience. I think some of you have said a couple things about this, but would you just like to leave people with something to say, you know, if you're feeling beaten down by everything that's happening these days, as many of us are, what would you recommend, you know?
I would like to pop in before the authors answer this and say each of their books are inspiring around resilience, and that's why they were selected for this panel. Potted Meat and Helen's wonderful books, The Newcomers, Soldier Girls, the other title I can't recall, and Fig, and The Marvelous Equations of the Dread, and Marcia's other work, all go, you know, maybe not directly using the word resilience, but are going deeply into stories that called upon implicitly resilience. So now I'll let the authors respond.
Well, that question resonated for me, and I'm trying to read, when I read the news, which is a part of my process as a nonfiction writer. I'm very news attuned. I'm trying to read only the headlines and only read a story if I feel it's going to offer me hope, unless I feel I have extra capacity that day to take in more suffering. So I'm really paying attention to this question of what inspires hope. And I think that was part of the question. I'll let the other writers speak. I think they're going to be more eloquent on this about pieces of writing that give them hope. But I think having that question that you're asking at the forefront of your mind right now feels so healthy. And that's what I'm doing. I'm just noticing what gives me hope. How can I move in that direction?
Well, two of the books I mentioned earlier, one was Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider, and the other one was Kim Rosen's Saved by a Poem. Those two books, for starters, I would recommend. And I think I also recommended listening to some good music with some good lyrics as well. Listen to Chronix and Janine.
Well, I've been, like Marcia said earlier, reading a lot of children's literature, and it is all about friendship and hope and so much. But one I read last night was, well, I've been reading for a week because my kid loves it, so we've been reading it for a week straight, is the Berenstain Bears Get in a Fight. Is so beautiful. Brother and sister have an argument and they figure out how to make up and work on their projects together, and it's just so nice. Yeah, so that's what I'm recommending.
I wrote a letter to the Berenstain Bears author when I was 8 years old. It's like a husband and wife, and they sent me back, you know, all this Berenstain Bears paraphernalia. I have it somewhere. I'll have to show it to you sometime, Stephen.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I've been reading short stories right now, mostly because I'll be honest, you know, the PTSD of what's happening all around us has made it difficult for me to wrap my mind around a novel at the moment. And so short stories and poems seem digestible. One short story writer that I'm absolutely in love with right now is Samantha Hunt. She wrote a collection called The Dark Dark. And it's an example of sort of, I don't know, there's magical realism and speculative fiction aspects to it. I think there's a lot we can learn from genre fiction. That's something that I'm getting more and more interested in. Just the way that extended metaphor is played out in those particular types of landscapes. I think we can make more sense of our real world sometimes when it has fantastic elements to it.
Mm-hmm.
One of our attendees has asked a very straightforward, simple question, which in some sense I think we've all been circling around, but the attendee is focusing particularly upon the act of writing itself. What has writing as a practice taught you about resilience? What have you learned about resilience just from pursuing the craft itself?
I was bending over to get all of my rejection letters, but then I realized it would make too much noise and there's just way too many of them. But right here, there is a 2-chest drawer. The bottom drawer is completely filled with rejection letters. So that will show you the resilience that I think it can take to be a writer. I mean, honestly, I was sending my work out maybe a little too soon, a little too excited when I was younger. The New Yorker, for example, was one of the first places I submitted to, as if. But at any rate, yeah, you know, you just get back up again over and over and over and over again. It's, you know, it's part of the gig. But I think, like Marcia was saying, even when it's hard, it's who I am. And so it's like, it's me wrestling with my own psyche and my own being. It's a deep thinking, a deep practice of being me. And of being able to connect with all the writers that have moved and touched me in return. So those rejection letters, yeah, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think all of us so loved the passage that you read, Sarah, that which is just sort of listening to the way the words just flowed one into another, even with this tragic thing. But I was just stunned to listen to the way you read it out. So I have a little trouble imagining all that pile of rejection letters. I think maybe those people need to reread that stuff. But anyway, someone else asked, in expressing appreciation for all the wonderful panelists, someone wrote, said, particularly questioning about, you know, historical fiction, you know, stories about things that we think did happen as opposed to stories about things that we think didn't happen, or something like that. You know, particularly focusing on social disparities and injustice. I mean, if anything's coming to the fore these days, it's the hard inequity. You know, our friend and leader and teacher, Sanjoy Roy, the producer of For Teamwork Arts, is always talking about the question of equity and inequity as being central to JLF. And so someone's asking, do any stories, particularly historical stories, come to mind about inequity and injustice and disparity and how people make their way through such difficult times that, you know, that buoy you up and that might help now? And the questioner says, even reading stories about, you know, the depth of it all, about the Holocaust itself, she said, it helps me to think about suffering now, you know, and how to suffer and how to get through suffering. So she's just wondering, you know, do you have any reflection on that in particular?
I'd recommend Sarah Broom's book, The Yellow House, which I'm reading right now. If you have an appetite for you know, authors who deal with inequity and in the nonfiction genre, I'm excited that she's coming to Lighthouse. I signed up for her class. Coming to Lighthouse by Zoom, I think in June, soon.
Yeah.
And I'm eager to hear what other people have to say as well.
Sarah Broom, The Yellow House, is that what it was?
About Katrina and New Orleans, yes, and
Uh-huh.
her family's home
Right.
there and what happened to it.
Yeah, we tried to bring her to JLF last fall, and
Is it, I
didn't
want
work
to
out.
put it in the chat so people can see it. Broom, like
I'll
would
put it
say-
in the chat.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
Sarah
perfect.
M. Broom with an E on the end, I think.
There you go. Thank you. I was about to
Earlier-
misspell her name terribly.
Earlier on, Stephen mentioned Roxane Gay. I think it was you, Stephen, right?
With Sarah, I think.
Sarah? Okay. The book of hers I'm thinking of is her book of short stories, Haiti. I think that that book might fall into the realm of something this person is asking for. The question is to offer texts which deal with inequities. Was that what it is?
Yeah, particularly about historical fiction, is just, but I just think anything. I mean, the theme here is, the terrible inequity that's being exposed,
Yeah.
as we make our way through this monstrous nightmare that we're living through right now. But inequity and injustice, and what kind of stories speak to that?
That covers a lot of ground. I would say. That covers a lot.
The whole of
lot of
literature,
ground.
maybe.
But
But
I'm gonna
whatever.
throw Roxane Gay's Haiti out there, and also another book, because I read it recently. I would say Patrick Chamoiseau's Slave Old Man, which I think is really beautifully written, it is. Many books have been written about slavery, but he gives it a fresh look.
Yeah. What was the name again? I want to put it in the chat.
Patrick Chamoiseau from Martinique, and the name of the book is Slave Old Man.
Old man, yeah. For another local author who wasn't able to join us tonight, Cully Fajardo, Anstein, Sabrina, and Corina, particularly about the Latino, Latinx, whichever you prefer, experience of the last 300-400 years in the Southwest, and being resettled by the Anglo and utterly marginalized in what was their homeland, maybe not their original place of origin, but as their families over centuries intermarried with indigenous populations, this is as much their homeland as original homeland as anyone's. So it's a really well lauded book in the last year, very, very much award winning, and is one of our own local authors. It's a book of short stories, Sabrina and Corina. Yeah.
It's a gorgeous book. I second the recommendation.
Amazing.
That's one of my current favorites. And as I said, those short stories are sometimes more digestible right now.
And she doesn't pull any punches.
Yeah, no. I've been thinking a lot about A Raisin in the Sun lately. It's a play, but I think that it's a play that's definitely worth reading and or watching.
Interesting, yeah. I'd like to maybe ask what might be our final question. I'm sort of back to, and I apologize if you feel you've already answered this, but in one of your works, pick a character or a real person and how they may have grappled with accessing resiliency. And you were writing about it through this person, through this character. And they may not have identified that that's what they were doing, but just by their life circumstances, that is what they were doing. So I'd love to hear each of you talk about that in terms of who you have written about and how that surfaced. Yeah.
Well, I've written about a number of characters who might fall into that category, but maybe one I might speak about now is the character Lena, who is in my most recent novel, The Marvelous Equations of the Dread. And Lena is a deaf Rasta woman. She was born hearing and became deaf later on due to a certain violence. And the way in which resilience plays out in her life is that she needs to learn a new language and a new way of being and moving in the world. And she needs to adapt what it means to speak deaf woman, as she puts it, meaning sign language on Rasta terms, and how to communicate and live and breathe in the world.
In the newcomers, I felt I was in a classroom where the students who were arriving in the United States from all around the world had very different trajectories, partly because maybe their home language was very close to English, or maybe it was very far away. Maybe they had chosen to come to this country, or instead maybe their parents had kind of dragged them along and they didn't want to be here. But in terms of resilience, the students were more or less ready to be resilient in that moment in time. And their teacher never felt that they must be resilient now, and was very tolerant of the idea that they were in that classroom doing their utmost, and they may be carrying things he couldn't understand, couldn't see. But I did wind up celebrating one student who was just a rocket ship in terms of his learning. And I guess I would just mention that I'm just to celebrate his success. His name is Methuselah. He arrived in the United States in 2015 as a freshman from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is the #1 sender of refugees here. And I tell his family's story. But today he's a student at the University of Denver, where he's getting straight A's. You know, he arrived with no English, very little English, and today he's getting straight A's. He just finished an internship working for Congressman Joe Neguse, and he ran for freshman senator representing his class in the student senate at TU. And when you see a young person who has overcome a lot, who wants to thrive and move forward at that pace, it's just an extraordinary thing to witness.
I guess the character Fig from my first novel would be a character of resilience. I'm really interested in the coming of age story because of the way that children become adults. I mean, we're always in a constant state of becoming, no matter how old we are. But I think that what shapes us into being the adults that we become happens as children. And so Fig is very much challenged by the fact that her mother is living with schizophrenia. She is challenged with having obsessive compulsive disorder, which is something that I have issues with myself. And so there's a lot of emotional truths that come through that particular character, even though she is not me. But I did practice the calendar of ordeals, which is something that she does. And the more that I think about it, you know, I can't think of any kind of narrative or character where resilience at least isn't a thread of the tension of the narrative. You know, we like the best way to write a character is to, you know, essentially throw a whole bunch of shit at them and see how they respond to it. You know, it's how in real life we know who we are is how we deal with the traumas that come our way, right? But it's particularly interesting to me through the experience of a child or adolescent.
Yeah, I'll say with my second book, the narrator is in the military, like in the Navy, like I was. But I think being in like that type of machine that is about violence of other people and violence of yourself and all of that. So the narrator of this book like goes through and is collecting stories from other people, examining documents and critical text about the military. So part of that character's resilience is collecting stories, connecting with people, and being critical of the thing that it's part of. I mean, that he's part of. So that would be a type of resilience for that character.
This session has just gotten richer and richer and richer, and I just can't thank you all enough for participating with us this evening. It's been an honor, and it's been I don't know, like a warm, really elaborate quilt flung around me. So thank you so much for that, and thank you to our audience for participating. And there's a lot of love expressed in the chat for all of you, and we will come back probably towards the end of June, probably on a couple of Sunday afternoons. We're trying to not overlap with Lighthouse Writers Lit Fest going on in June, but to kind of fit in to that a little bit with some JLF sessions. So I just can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you all so much. It's really fabulous. All
Thank
right,
you,
well,
Marcia, for moderating.
yeah.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, yes.
I enjoyed
Fabulous, fabulous job. I'm letting all the participants unmute themselves if they would like to put their voice in. So,
Anyway, great
Thank you,
to see our
everybody.
four writers. I feel like all of you are old friends to JLF, and we're really, really thrilled to see you again.
Yeah.
And we hope many more times in the future.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Be well.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.